Next, from Chicago, Senate President John Cullerton gives his explanation of what is happening as the governor and the Democratic legislative leaders try to resolve their budget differences. This runs about 30 minutes.
So it's July 22nd, but for all practical purposes, it might as well be January 22nd. That's because as far as the budget goes, we are essentially back to square one. The governor's rejected nearly our entire budget. At the same time, the governor never gave us a real budget, a balanced plan that could pass. So rather than fight over proposals that aren't going anywhere, I'd like to suggest that we hit the reset button and start over. So I'm here today to call upon the governor to submit a new balanced budget to the General Assembly, a plan that reflects the budgetary lessons we've learned over the past few months. Over a year and a half ago, I stood in this very room and offered candidate Rauner a challenge. Get specific about your budget plans. He never took me up on that, but nonetheless got elected, and so he now is the governor. And that challenge of balancing the budget became a constitutional requirement. The governor does deserve credit for submitting a plan on time, but there was a problem with his plan. It wasn't balanced. As many of you reported at the time, his plan started with a $2.2 billion revenue shortfall. The governor sought to bank savings from a pension plan before it was approved by the legislature and the judicial branches. Additionally, the budget assumed savings from programmatic changes that needed federal or court approval, which the governor never sought. This was played out in recent weeks as courts stepped in to reinforce consent decrees and other orders to keep numerous programs and services afloat, even though there's no budget. At the end of the day, the governor's budget was nearly $6 billion in the hole. He had pension reform, as I mentioned, $2.2 billion, unconstitutional. He proposed cutting Medicaid by $1.5 billion. Problem was required change in state law and federal approval, and no one even introduced a bill. He wanted to eliminate college insurance program and teachers' retirement insurance program to save $113 million. Nobody introduced the bill. He wanted to cut group health insurance by $570 million. That would be subject to his collective bargaining with the unions. That's still on hold. He wanted to propose cutting funding for local governments, $913 million. Nobody even put a bill in to do that. And he wanted to cut dedicated human service programs by $492 million. Problem is, it violated consent decrees, judicial orders, and some state and federal laws. So not only was the governor's plan not balanced, it was unconscionable and it was unworkable. Governor Rauner's plan included proposals that will undermine access to health care, child care, affordable college and retirement security for hardworking middle-class families. These programs provide many of the work supports and opportunities that families need to succeed and respond to the economy. It didn't reflect the priorities of the majority of the General Assembly and the people that were elected to serve. So we offered a budget. We crafted it ourselves, one that protected the interests of middle class and vulnerable populations. It was a lean budget, 1% growth from the previous year that included some of the governor's recommended funding levels and cuts. Still, we knew that the budget plan couldn't be complete until we had complementary revenue reform to address the nearly $4 billion shortfall. We were honest about that from the start and from the beginning, and we invited the Republicans and the governor that shared our priorities to work with us on crafting a complete budget solution. The governor rejected that offer, vetoed the plan. So that brings us here today. His plan is dead, our plan is dead. Let's acknowledge that and let's start moving forward. The governor's task won't be nearly as hard as his first plan, because this time many of the decisions have been made for him. $23.5 billion of the budget is already being spent. It's over 60% of the budget. $15 billion in costs are left to fund or cut. If you look at this chart, you'll see what's already being spent. Pensions for teachers are being paid automatically. Teacher health care costs are being paid. Debt service is being paid. The money that goes to local governments and mass transit is being paid. Department of Children and Family Services are being paid by a court order. Human service programs tied to consent decrees are being paid. State employee salaries are being paid by court order. And the governor signed the budget for education, the K through 12. What's still left to be appropriated are Medicaid. And remember, Medicaid is a liability under current law. Group insurance, that's the part I talked about, where we have an obligation to pay, but we need a new contract to get savings. The entire higher education budget hasn't been appropriated. There's grants to schools to pay for assessments for tests that hasn't been appropriated. There's human service programs that are not tied to consent decrees that have not been appropriated. These would be things like respite care for disabled kids and their parents. And there's other state programs, primarily probation services, that have not been appropriated. So we're calling upon the governor to make these proposals. How does he want to spend the money that's remaining on those programs? So working with the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, we would project we would have a $33 billion, a little over $33 billion in revenue available for us to spend in fiscal year 16. So if we were just to look at the spending that's happening now, the revenue hole would be over $5.3 billion. We think that we have the possibility of cutting some of the Medicaid costs and saving money. We talked about the group health costs that could be saved through the negotiations. So as a result, we believe we have a gap of about $4 billion. Now, the reason why the budget is so important is that the governor spent his time in office prioritizing a corporate agenda that will satisfy his corporate friends. Well, some of these ideas are worthy of debate. The governor's been unable to provide one shred of evidence that his agenda adds 1 cent to the ledger for our budget crisis in the short term or to elevate our credit rankings in the long term. So credit rating agencies have been clear. They have repeatedly referenced specific factors that will move Illinois from its current status as the state with the lowest credit ratings in the country. We need revenue to address structural deficits, they say. We need constitutional pension reform, and we need to deal with our bill backlog. So the governor has chosen to hold the budget hostage to a corporate agenda. We risk further downgrades and eroding confidence in our state. The rating agencies aren't asking for collective bargaining changes or policy changes unrelated to the budget. They're doing the math on our budgets. They're looking at income and liabilities, and that's where our focus ought to be. Now, this bill backlog is really important. One area of fiscal policy that rating agencies and businesses look to in Illinois, they want stability. Businesses want stability, and they want to know that there's predictability in being a vendor in the state. It's a budget issue. From fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 14, our budgets paid down our bill backlog by billions. According to information from the governor's office on management of the budget, our backlog grew as high as $9.3 billion in fiscal year 12. By the end of fiscal year 14, that number had dropped to $3.8 billion. But according to the governor's office of managing the budget, this bill backlog has started to climb again, and our unresolved budget makes it worse. So leaving the fiscal 16 budget unresolved and relying upon the current status quo could force the backlog up to over $14.5 billion this time next year. So the governor's priorities shouldn't be forced at the expense of our duty to pass a state budget, pay our vendors, and provide services. So I would suggest we stop the sideshows and focus on the fixes that the rating agencies say that we need. So we are willing, especially in the Senate Democratic caucus, we have a working supermajority. We're willing to have conversations with the governor on how to compromise. We're willing to do that. But we need to have a balanced budget. So I'm asking the governor to take this opportunity, submit a credible and balanced plan that will address our short-term crisis, shore up our credit rating in the long term. We're going to go back to Springfield August 4th. It's my hope that there can be compromises before that time. We need to hit the reset button so we can move forward with a resolution. Be happy to answer any questions.
Today, and Speaker Madigan has been having weekly press conferences. The governor has been out also. Why today?
We passed the budget last time we were in session to pay for critical services through August 1st. We are in anticipation. That's on the governor's desk. He can sign that. The most important thing the governor does is sign a budget. He's vetoed past budgets. He's not even acted on the budget we put on his desk. We have this chart here showing you that 60% of the budget's already gone out the door, and we need to focus on the next 40%. We're going back in after August 1st to see if we can appropriate more money to pass a budget. And that's why I'm here to suggest to the governor we need to hear from him. If we don't hear from him, there's until August 1st, there's a bill we put on his desk, and he's got to act on it.
John, as a matter of practical politics, doesn't the governor lose his bargaining leverage with you, his ability to get your caucus in the House Democrats to consider some of these changes that they don't like and approve some of them? Doesn't he give away all that leverage if he signs off on a budget?
Well, you can't hold the state budget hostage for those items. We've been talking to him about those items. We are willing to work with him on workers' comp. We're willing to work with him on the property tax freeze. I've advanced the bill, which I hope we can pass when we go back to enact the property tax freeze. But the most important thing we do is pass a budget, and he's got to understand that. And we're willing to work with him on those other items, but the budget's the #1 priority. And we don't want to get downgraded even more than we already are, and that's what's going to happen if we don't pass a balanced budget.
John, have you ever seen this happen before with past governors? I mean, what's this?
I've been the president of the Senate for 7 years. And what we've been doing in those 7 years is paying down old debt, as I talked about. We've been taking on the unions when it's appropriate. We've been trying to pass balanced budgets and improve our economy, which has happened. And so this is a divided government. I'm open to, I understand that. We're willing to work with Republicans. We're in overtime now, and we have to focus on what our job is.
Yeah,
That is to pass a balanced
What
budget.
about the tax that Rauner's doing in public on?
They're obviously not helpful. We want to compromise with people. He's never been here before. He's never done this. He's never been in government. He's got to learn that this is not the private sector, and we all have a role to play. We're willing to work with him and compromise.
Why can't the Democrats just marshal supermajorities in both houses to either veto, or to override the governor's veto, or pass revenue changes on their own without the governor's involvement?
Well, we did override the governor's veto in the Senate with our working supermajority. We don't have the votes to raise revenue. That's why we're asking him for his proposals. Or if he's got $4 billion worth of cuts in this budget, that we want to hear from him. Nobody even introduced a bill to provide any cuts. He couldn't get one Republican to introduce a bill. So that's why it's time for him to finally give us a balanced budget.
Senator, when the governor stands in front of the microphones, he makes it sound very simple. All the Democrats have to do is approve a handful of bills that he says he wants to see before he can talk about revenue. Why isn't it that simple?
Because the handful of bills are pretty radical bills, or he's not aware of the issues that they deal with. For example, workers' compensation. He seems to be unaware of the fact that we passed a major workers' comp bill 4 years ago. His own workers' comp commission issued a report a few months ago documenting the dramatic reduction in premiums and the reduction in benefits to workers. If he's got some more ideas, we're open to talking to him about it. And, this agenda, this anti-union agenda, is just not supported, not only by our caucus, but by a number of people in his own caucus. And it doesn't relate to the state budget. And as a result, the most important thing we do is pass a state budget. You can't hold it hostage for these unrelated budgeted agendas.
Mr. President, can you respond to his repeated observation yesterday that lawmakers continue to be paid during all of this, and that...
Yeah, he's probably not aware of the fact that came about as a result of 2 court decisions.
Well, we know how it came about, but the fact that the irony exists.
Well, it's the court ruled. It is not irony. It's something that the court ruled that because of separation of powers, you can't have a situation where the executive branch, like Governor Quinn, holds up people's salaries in order to force them to vote for a bill. And so that he forced us to sue. The judge ruled that you can't do that. And that's why we're receiving, just like the rest of the state employees are receiving our salaries.
But it's bad PR, huh?
Well, unfortunately, it's the Constitution. And I think you would understand that if we didn't like some judicial decision, and we said, oh, Supreme Court, you're working for $1 now, that would obviously not be a part of the separation of powers. It's the same principle with the legislature.
How long
What
do
is the
you,
communication
how
level
long
with
do you
the-
fear this could go on?
I think the bond rating agencies are critical. That might be a language he understands. And we're already lowest in the nation. We don't have to be at all. There's a solution to this budget crisis. Working together, we can come up with either the cuts or the revenues. We want to work on this. We've been wanting to work on it from day one. He just has had these sideshows that are not focused on the most important thing the state does.
So
You
what
said
what
that the
tell us
rating
there-
agencies, are also focused on pension reform. What
Yeah.
what about?
Be happy to talk to you about pension reform. I sat down with the governor for an hour and a half. I brought my lawyer in. I went through the Supreme Court decision, which I obviously had predicted before. It was unanimous. It was unconstitutional. We had passed that bill only because we needed a test case to prove to the rest of the world that the pension clause says what it says. And so we have presented to the governor a constitutional pension reform bill that will save $1 billion a year, starting in 2 years.
But
And we gave it to him. And he took it and said, that's very interesting. And he came back with his own pension bill, which is just as unconstitutional as the last one. So I don't know what else I can do. And by the way, I had negotiated a pension bill, you may recall, with the unions, with their support. The people who were the plaintiffs in the lawsuit had signed off on our bill, which never got called in the House. And now that they've won in court, the unions are against any pension reform. So whenever the governor and the Republicans want to sit down and talk about a constitutional pension reform bill over the objections of the unions, I'd be more than happy to work with them. Mary Ann?
On the pay raise, back to that, what their argument is, yes, getting paid, but as far as a raise, they say...
Yeah, the raise is part of the Supreme Court decision and the Jorgensen decision. If people want to give their pay raises, their COLAs back, they're more than happy to do it. And that's what's happened. A number of the people are doing that. That was, a Supreme Court decision said that the COLAs are part of your package. Another court decision said that these are part of your salary, cannot be diminished, can't be changed during your term.
How many of your caucus is giving the money back?
You know, when you think about this budget, you can understand how that's a diversion, that the governor is talking about that instead of passing the budget. So that's why I'm here today. I want you guys to realize 60% of the budget has already been passed. The other 40% is right here. And the Medicaid bills are already being accrued because it's a liability. So are group insurance. I think we ought to fund our institutions of higher ed, and we've got to do this. And that's what we're focused our attention on. And the rating agencies don't care about, collective bargaining issues and workers' comp. And that's why we're here.
So
What
are you
is
going
the
to tell?
communication?
Yes, ma'am.
The governor's office has just put out a statement in response to this, saying that,
Before I even finished?
yes,
That's not good.
Yeah, you want to say it?
saying that they want you to focus on passing his turnaround agenda. So you guys are just talking past each other at this point.
We will focus on working with the governor on this turnaround agenda as we have all year. So workers' comp, tort reform issues, property tax freeze, we'll go back down and try to pass that bill again. Anything else he wants to talk about? We'll be happy
Well,
to-
the statement says President Cullerton made clear today that the view of a balanced budget is a budget that makes no spending reforms, no pension reform, and only raises taxes.
Okay, we're not
Moving our state
proposing-
forward, backward to the failed tax and spend policy of the past, we urge President Cullerton to work with us to pass meaningful structural reforms.
Well, good. I guess we must have given a copy of this to him before we came here. And we're not calling for a tax increase, we're asking for him to tell us how to balance this budget. The pension reform that we gave him is constitutional, the one he gave us back is not. We're willing to work with him on those other items. He hasn't even, if he's talking about cutting part of this budget, maybe he can get somebody to introduce a bill
What is the communication level of the governor's office?
Anytime he calls me and asks for a meeting, I go.
When?
A couple of weeks ago. Talked about property tax freezes. I spent an hour with him, and I went through the whole reason why property tax bills are high, primarily because we're last in the nation in providing funding for schools from the state. We talked about how his property tax bill is, 2/3 of the suburban's property tax bills for education. I said we are willing to push a bill for a property tax freeze, but we have to take care of the poor school districts. The wealthier school districts, like his, New Trier, has $80 million worth of surpluses. So there's another reason why the property tax bills are high. And we also have a problem with the pension system, where the state pays for the pension cost, the employer cost for his suburban school districts. So these are nuanced. And you can't just use a bumper sticker from when you're running for governor and then start governing that way. You have to be engaged, and you have to make compromises and proposals. That's what we've been willing to do. Yes, sir.
What do you want him to just take off the table in terms of his agenda? Because there are union proposals that seem to be just things that Democrats just can't support. So what would you say to him? Just get rid of this.
He almost lost his primary because of union, because he didn't know that there's Republicans in Illinois who are pro-union, and so he doesn't have any support for his proposals in his own party, other than the intimidation of having a bunch of money. So it's not going to happen. But he wants, for example, to take away collective bargaining rights because he wants to lower property taxes. Well, we explained to him there's other reasons why property taxes are high, and there's other things you can do to lower property taxes. So there's an example of a conversation with him. Workers' comp, totally unaware of the bills that we passed, and unaware of the fact that his own workers' comp agency has documented the major reductions, 22%, the largest reductions in premiums in the nation in the last 4 years. So those are examples of how this is, governing's a little more different than just campaigning, and that's what he seems to be.
So, Mr. President, nothing's really changed then.
What's changed
other than you're asking for a reset, your positions are still the same.
No, I'm talking about compromise. I'm talking about on this budget. We've got these expenditures that have to be appropriated. We haven't appropriated them. He's vetoed. Okay? We have a temporary budget appropriation on his desk. Expires August 1st. We have to go back in and work on the budget. We have to appropriate. I'm asking him to give us his proposal. And we've got a couple weeks before we go back down. That's enough time to do it. On these other items that he talks about as his agenda, that is holding the budget hostage on, I'm telling him.
We don't want to hear about that.
I'm telling him, no, I told you we're more than happy to. But there's
now,
very few things, when you start off with these really, the speaker calls them extreme, radical, I agree with that. We can always do incremental things. But he has not moved at all off of those things. In the meantime, he's vetoing budgets. And then soon, we're going to have our state be downgraded. And he's so concerned about being competitive, the rest of the states around us, we're not going to be competitive if we get downgraded.
What are the odds of getting all parties to agree soon, because you have a financial crisis at CPS, on some sort of pension relief for CPS? Pension relief for teachers, for Chicago, for picking up the normal costs of CPS.
Yeah, that was in the property tax freeze bill that I'm going to call again when I go back down to Springfield. Provided $500 million worth of relief for the Chicago public schools. $197 million would be to pay for the normal cost. The remainder was a change in the ramp for 2 years. And it would avoid 3,000 teacher layoffs. And I'm going to try to pass that.
What's going to be different this time? Do you have more members that will be there?
I'm going to hopefully get some people who voted no to vote yes, and hopefully we'll maybe.
On which side of the aisle?
Well, I'm working with the supermajority of Democrats. I'd be more than happy. If you saw the debate, Senator Rodonio and I are more than happy to work together. She appreciates the fact that we've been open, looking for compromises. They have the ability to offer amendments to the bill. It's a Senate bill. I'm open to any amendments that they want to offer, but in the meantime, I think we ought to pass a bill that keeps the Chicago schools from having to lay off 3,000 teachers.
There's been some talk that a couple of senators who are close to the speaker got pulled off.
It's not true. Not true. those senators and other reasons to vote no, and I think we've convinced them to vote yes.
The governor yesterday said pretty much on the budget that if it was just him and you negotiating, this would have been done weeks ago. But where does he come up with that?
It's not negotiating with me on the budget.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. I don't know what he's talking
Well,
about.
why aren't you guys in a room together? I think people don't understand.
You want me to
why
invite
every
everybody into a
day
room, or do you think
three
the
of you
governor
are
should do
together
that?
and you
I think the governor ought to do
talking
that.
through us.
I will go to any meeting the governor
Why don't
wants
you
to
call a meeting?
I could call a meeting, invite the governor, and say, Governor, what do you want to do?
And the speaker, can't you organize a
Sure, I can get
meeting
the
or
speaker to
president
come.
of the Senate?
Yeah, and then if it's like the other meetings, we sit there and the guy reads off a sheet of paper and nothing changes.
Why are they not productive?
I would say it's because the governor's not addressing these issues that I've addressed here with the budget. That's the most important thing we do. He doesn't acknowledge that we've passed workers' comp reform. He doesn't talk about the inability to get any support politically for these other changes. So that's what we're doing. But the budget's the most important thing we do, because he ran on an idea of making us more competitive. That was one of his big talking points. And so, and a couple of his items, freezing property taxes, we're willing to talk to him about. Workers' comp reform, we're willing to do some more on that if we can. So we're open to that. I go to these meetings, and that's what I say to him.
How long do you
But
think?
these are, as I said, more nuanced than he's appreciating.
We're going on without a budget now for 3 weeks. Everybody talks about a government shutdown, but we're not really feeling it too much now.
That's because 60% of it has already been appropriated.
Okay. When do you, when
But
will it?
you're going to run out of money. These haven't been appropriated. The bottom part here, what's left, hasn't been appropriated, can't be spent. Medicaid providers are providing services, there's no authorization to pay them. So we have to pass an authorization. The budget is an authorization for the governor to spend money. If we don't pass an authorization, he can't spend it. He's the one that vetoed it. So we have to go back and give him authorization to spend money. We're inviting him today to tell us how does he want to spend it. If he's got some ideas on how to save some money on stuff that's already being spent, tell us what they are. Not unconstitutional pension reform bills. Have somebody sponsor a bill that saves money on above the line there. I'd be happy to take it up. That's what we're here for. We're focused on the budget.
John, it doesn't seem like there's any incentive. I mean, if 60% of the budget is being paid, and you're not maybe getting pressure from the women who, you know, the moms who have disabled kids and aren't getting paid through Medicaid, or however that's working, this could go on forever. I mean, and this whole...
Well, it won't go on forever because there's going to be ramifications that may not be evident right now, but there's a myriad of things that could happen. There's money that's owed, for example, to McCormick Place from the state. It hasn't been appropriated. It could stop work on the expansion. We could start losing conventions. There's the downgrade, which I talked about, which I think is the most of the greatest concern. So it's just focusing the fact that this is what we do. We pass budgets and we appropriate money, and they have to be balanced. And if you don't have enough money, you got to propose cuts or you got to propose revenue.
Any part of you fear that he doesn't want a budget until he gets everything he wants?
Well, I mean, that's what he's starting off with, I guess. And I think that he's, as I said, he's admitted it. He's new at this. He hasn't done this before. And I don't think he's had the background and the understanding of what these items are that he's even asking for. So that's what I think we have to do. We have to continue to meet to see if we can educate him. And again, I'm always willing to listen to his arguments and see if there's a way to get support. This is a supermajority of Democrats and a bunch of pro-union Republicans in this state. This isn't, you know, Oklahoma or Kansas. And so he's got to understand, he ran for governor in Illinois, and he's got to look at the realities of the legislature.
Have you been alerted that the bond rating agencies are getting close to downgrading us? Are we going into the market again soon? Or?
Reading the bond buyer from July 6th, he's saying next 2 months, if they don't see any progress. You know, the bond debt service is being paid, so they're looking at that and saying, well, bonds are being paid, but they downgrade if lawmakers are unable to agree to a structural fix to an estimated $4 billion budget shortfall. That's what they said in the bond buyer. So I think it's something, hopefully he'll understand that language.
Just a couple more questions.
What are you telling the people what's left? What are you telling universities?
That we passed the budget and the governor vetoed it?
That doesn't help them though, so what do they?
Well, we all have a role. Our role, we can't spend money. The governor spends money. We are not allowed to spend money. We don't procure anything. We only authorize. We've done that. He's vetoed. We're going to go back and do it again. We're asking him for advice on what he wants to do. He proposed cutting higher ed by 31%. We cut by, I think, 6%, 6.5%. So we've already made cuts. We've already passed a responsible budget for these areas, but it's still not balanced, and we still have to go back and pass another authorization.
Mr. President, should the public be concerned that macho or testosterone is involved here, that you guys just won't back down because you don't want to look like a punk?
Yeah. You know, Charles, the Senate Democrats, we try to recruit women candidates because we think that they're better candidates. They're better candidates, more women than us, and they tend to vote for women more than men vote for men. And they make great senators and make great state representatives. So that's a good idea. Maybe we should start getting some more women. Now, I happen to think that I have testosterone, but I also think I'm willing to cooperate and work with the governor, and I'm willing to do that and continue to do that. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.
Punks.